Hi, everybody who's listening this week. Welcome to Mark's Mouthpiece. And this week, my guest is Jeff Curnow, longtime trumpet player, Philadelphia Orchestra associate principal now for several years. Before that, Dallas Symphony principal trumpet. And as many people know, before that, a long time in the Empire Brass. So I promise we'll ask all the appropriate questions for anything that starts before 11 o'clock at night. When it comes
That's
to that.
not fun. I need inappropriate questions. That's what I need.
We'll do it. We'll do it in the after hours session.
Okay.
So Jeff, I've always been a fan of your playing. Before we get into questions, I remember hearing you with Empire when I was in 11th grade. You guys came on tour and you played at a place called Winthrop College in South Carolina. Had a really great hall, and that was, I mean, I'm sure for a lot of people my age that are in their 40s or early 50s, hearing you guys was a big deal back then. So, but that was the first time I heard you, and it was mind blowing what you guys sounded like that night. So, I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about your beginnings in music. I think your father was your first teacher. Is that right?
Yeah. And first of all, thanks for having me here. This is fun. It's great
Yeah,
to meet you,
nice
and
to meet you officially.
it's
Yeah.
always great to chat. Yeah, my dad was a trumpet player. His father was a trumpet player. So it was either that or I was going to get kicked out of the family and live on the streets. But my uncle played for Stan Kenton. He was a trombone player. My aunt played euphonium. And my father was also a vocal major. I was surrounded by it, so it was it was the thing to do. It was, and it looked like fun to me. I mean, everybody was having fun. Uh, a musical family was a lot of fun to be around. We had music friends that were in the music business, and they'd come over and we'd have parties, and my dad would take me to gigs, and so there was nothing else for me. I just thought it was the coolest thing to do for a living.
Well, what kind of trumpet player was he? Mostly doing like club dates or bands or
Yeah, he was a music education major, so he was my high school band director, and a very good one. He was a great teacher, great theory teacher, but he was also a devout trumpet player and brass enthusiast, and he played everything. He played. I remember going down and watching him on a barge in a canal playing water music with an orchestra, and he would take me to gigs at the Mexican American Club in Bethlehem. He'd be playing gigs there, and he'd do jazz gigs, classical gigs. We played at church together. It was, he did everything. He was a real true freelance player, and that was in our house. Everything from classical, baroque to jazz, big band. It was all available.
yeah. So I'm sure there was a lot of music playing all the time too, if that was the
Yeah.
case. Was
Yep.
do you remember anything in particular that was like a constant thing you were hearing of trumpet players in your house, like recordings or anything like that?
Well, when it comes to since Dad was loved the instrument, and he really collected a lot of books. He collected a ton of method books, like this a stack this high, everything from double high C in 37 weeks to the Maggio system to the Arben's book, the St. Jacomb's, everything, every method you could imagine. And on top of that, with recordings, he had Miles, Freddie, Dizzy. He had Jerry Schwartz. He was the first one to bring the New York Trumpet Ensemble into the house and introduced me to Maurice Andre and Roger Voisin. And we had such a variety that was playing all the time. I mean, he'd put it on, especially if I was learning a particular solo. He'd say, here's how Guitarra does the Hummel. Here's how Andre does the Hummel. Here's how Jerry Schwartz does the Hummel. And we discuss it, and we talk about it, and where to put ornaments, how to do ornaments. It was fun. It was really interesting for me, and I was really passionate about it very early. I
Yeah.
really wanted to do that for a living, so and that helped when I was, going to college and making choices for schools, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do.
Well, how old were you when you started to play?
8, just about when everybody plays, and you know, and I was using my grandfather's trumpet. I started on my grandfather's trumpet.
You remember what that horn was?
I have it. It's an Olds Ambassador with a hand hammered bell, which is like little tiny dents all over it. I've never seen another trumpet like it. And Dad had it redone. He decided to send it out and have the whole thing refurbished. And so, yeah, I actually have it in the basement. It plays. It's a little tight, but it's a good sounding horn. And it's the one I, started on.
Do you remember how your dad started you playing? Was it just buzzing the mouthpiece, or did he have a way about it that he was introducing you to things?
Well, it basically he handed me the mouthpiece and said, "Here's a trumpet," and then actually had it in my hand since I was 4 or 5 and would play it because I saw him playing it. And there's a picture of the two of us. I must have been 2 or 3, and I have this little toy trumpet, and he's on the couch with his trumpet. And he never taught me. He was never officially my teacher.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to do that. He always sent me someplace else and said, "Look, this is not a great thing to do. You want to come and talk about something?" We play duets and things like that, and we discuss things, but he never thought it was a good idea to actually teach me. But yeah, I mean, there was mouthpiece buzzing. He'd buy different mouthpieces. He'd buy a couple Schilke mouthpieces or Bach mouthpieces or anything that happened to be, in vogue at that point. And then, we'd swap, go back and forth, talk about it. But I mean, I'd watch what he'd do, and he would always be trying new things. He was a consummate trumpet student right up until he passed. I mean, he was constantly trying to learn and get better.
Wow. Hey, well, so who did you study with when you were growing up outside of playing with your father at home?
Well, my first teacher was a guy named Bruce Herring, who was a freelancer in the Easton area, where I'm from, Easton, Pennsylvania. And he would play in up in the Poconos. There were clubs up there, and do freelancing. And he was also a music teacher. And he was the first guy that sat me down and said, "Okay, here's what we got to do. Boom, we got to learn this book and that book." And it was the Breeze Easy method, and then moving up from there, and the Arbenz book, and then finally, Dad, he said to my father, "Look, I think he needs to be with somebody else. I think, he's kind of blossoming here." And I guess I was around 14 or 15 years old. He said, "Why don't you call Seymour Rosenfeld?" And Dad thought, "Oh, okay." And I remember that phone call because he came to me with that Gabrielli album. And he said, "You see this guy right here?" He pointed to his picture. "Right, that's it."
That's it.
Right down in front. He said,
"Yeah,
I'm going to try to get you a lesson with him." I was like, "Oh my God." And we were both Philly Orchestra fans, ravenously. And so I remember him sitting down and making the phone call and saying, "Hi, my son is interested in doing this for a living and wondering if we could drive down and have a lesson with you." And then we'd go down every 2 weeks and study with Seymour. And Dad actually took a couple lessons also.
Yeah.
During our trips.
So what was that like? Because you started with him in high school, but you also continued with him through college. Is that right?
Yeah, I stuck with Seymour. It was a really good fit. And we drive down. I don't live far from the place where he used to live, and go into his basement, and he knew all the tricks. I was kind of set up okay, and I was ready to go. And I came in there and I was really hungry, and he says, "Okay, slow down. Here's what we got to do. We got to get you on a regimen, a warm-up regimen, and then we have to get you learning a lot of music," because I was a little behind. And that's exactly what I needed. So he had etude books and ways to play the etudes and exactly how to practice. He had me buzzing my lips and doing, things out of the Schlossberg book and all those rudimentary things to set me up, which I didn't really have with Bruce.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I needed. And it just flowed so well. I loved his stories. I loved the tricks of the trade that he brought to the lesson, how to do things, because I wanted to play in an orchestra. That's really what I wanted to do. And he would tell me how he did things. He'd play for me. He'd show me, "Yeah, you want to play a little louder here, not so loud here. Do this in an audition. Don't do that." It was like I said, it was so easy that I just stuck with him at Temple for the next 4 years. So it was
Now,
about 6 years in general.
was he mostly? Did he play mostly B flat trumpet?
Yeah, almost exclusively. And I'd see him play the C for like the beginning of Zarathustra and things like that. He would pick up the C for certain things, but he believed that the B flat trumpet in the second spot was the best way to go. And so everything was on B flat for me. And just to learn that and to get that sound, I loved his sound. I thought his sound was really great.
Yeah. What do you remember about like the warm up regimen or anything like that he had you doing? Do you remember specific things that?
The first thing he said is, we got to get you to buzz your lips, and then you buzz your lips for as long as you could. You take a deep breath and hold it for as long as you can. The first time I did it, I think it was like 8 seconds. And I remember I was sitting there. It was my first lesson, and this little kid came out, and with his dad was waiting in the basement for him, and they walked out, and I went in, and he asked me to buzz my lips. I buzzed my lips. It was like I said, 8-10 seconds at the most. He said, "Remember that little kid that walked out of here? He did 58 seconds." Well, that was it. Well, I had to beat that little kid. So it was things like that. And the Schlossberg book, he studied with Schlossberg, so he explained the whole method and how it came about. And he would pick a few out that he thought would really work for me. A lot of lip slurs, and the Clark technical studies. We hammered those out, because I did one or two, but I had to do, I went through the whole book, and he was really he was an old school trumpet player. The out of the Arbin's book, it was the tonguing and the characteristic studies in the back. And very little on excerpts, which kind of bummed me out a little bit. We did a couple here and there, but he said, we'll get to that. He said, right now, this is what you need to do. And we work on a cornet solo, something that I was going to do for district band or something like that, or the Hummel or the Haydn. So I had a plate full of stuff to do, but it was all good and everything that I needed.
Now, did you ever at any point play for Gil Johnson, or was that?
I played for Gil Johnson once, and it was when I was with the Empire Brass. Because by the time I was with Seymour, Frank was in the seat and Gil had gone to Miami.
Okay.
So we toured. We were playing at Miami, and at the University of Miami, and he was teaching there. He invited us for a class, and I got to have a lesson with this guy. He had been an idol of mine when I was a kid growing up, and I told him, I called him. I said, hey, I'm a student of Seymour's. Can I play for you? After the class or at some point. We're in town here for 3 days. And he said, oh, I'll come by. I'll pick you up. I'll bring you over. So I'm dressed, I think I'm in a suit, and I've got my horn, and I'm standing outside the hotel. I'm waiting for him, and I hear this, Jeff. And I turn around, and there's this pickup truck with, the cover on the back, all this fishing gear in the back. And he's just dressed like he's going fishing. And I get in the front of this truck, and it smells to high heaven of cigars. And I was smoking cigars at the time. I said, oh, Gil, it's great to meet you. Well, what are you smoking these days? And he reaches over, he's driving, he reaches over, opens up the glove compartment. There's like 9 cigars in there. He says, take one. I have them rolled, for me by this lady downtown. And so he went there and he played for me. And I was just so impressed. He sat at the piano and he played the beginning of the Schumann too. He said, you have to remember this is happening in there. And I played a couple excerpts for him. And just a very knowledgeable guy. And I always admired his sound. And he had a lot of great things to say. Yeah. So I was really happy I did that. And it was the only time I did it.
But he and Rosenfeld seemed like hand in glove, though, when you would hear them play. So
they were real buddies. And Seymour always spoke really fondly of Gil, and really loved working with him. And
and that generation's a little bit before what a lot of people who are listening to this right now would be. If you were going to like pick a couple of recordings of that generation of the Philly orchestra, what would you recommend that would be like most representative, you think?
Uh, the Blue Mean with, Mahler one with Gil playing the Blue Mean was just, you know, I had that recording, and to me, it's beautiful stuff. Academic Festival Overture, really great. I have an entire Wagner album that they did, which the trumpet section sounds absolutely fabulous in. Ein Heldenleben with Gil playing. I mean, that would have to be three of my favorites
Yeah.
that I remember. It was just really, I listened to them, I wore them out.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course the Gabrielli recording too.
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, that goes without saying, brass wise. And their Christmas album was fantastic. And they did an album called Catch the Brass Ring, which was nixed, was by Ormandy. They recorded this whole thing. They had all these fantastic arrangements, jazz arrangements of classical tunes, which is kind of what Empire did. And they put these all down on this thing called Catch the Brass Ring. It was called the Torchy Jones Brass Quintet. That's what they called it. And they sent it to Ormandy, and Ormandy says, no way is this ever going to be published. So Rosenfeld had a few copies of it, but I don't think it's ever been played. And the stack of music he had of all the arrangements he had in his basement, he showed them to me, and just really, really cool stuff. And I'm so sorry it was never, I don't know if it's out there. I don't know if anybody re-recorded it or has the tapes.
Yeah. And just for anybody watching one more time, this was the Philly brass section, and
Yeah.
sitting down in the front row next to Mason Jones there is Mr. Rosenfeld. So that's great. I've always known who he was, and I've never been able to really talk to anybody that studied with him directly. And did he talk about Schlossberg much in your lessons, or was he one of those guys that was Mr. Schlossberg said this or that? Was that kind of a
No, he talked about going, and I remember him talking about going and studying with him, and those days, but nothing specifically. He did tell me that this I don't know if people know that the Schlossberg book was compiled by Schlossberg's son-in-law
right?
after he died, and they were just things that he would sit down and write out for his students. This is what you need. Boom, he'd do this, and then all the students got together and put this book together. And so that's why I would look at this book and I think, this doesn't make any sense how this is laid out. But then he explained it to me, and how that all went about. But those days in New York, he was the teacher. That was the guy. And Louis Davidson would study with Schlossberg. I think Edelstein studied with Schlossberg as well. I mean, he was the guru.
Yeah, yeah. I had a couple lessons with Adelstein in his house in Florida, and you'll like this because he had a wall. I think I told this story a couple weeks ago. He had a wall of conductors like signed autographs to him. And so I said, "Who were your favorite conductors to play under?" He said, "Oh, the dead ones." So, you know.
Yeah, Bernie had a great sense of humor. Very dry.
Oh,
very dry sense of humor.
Oh yeah,
funny dude.
Oh, after I got a couple of good insults, and I felt like finally I could have one of my own. That's good.
Somebody told me one time he was asked a question in a lesson. Asked him, Mr. Edelstein, how do you feel about missed notes? And he said, surprised. It's always a surprise to me. Funny cat.
He told me, I'm sorry if anybody's heard this story before, but he told me, said, when I was 17 and playing in Pittsburgh, the principal trumpet said I had a tongue like a sledgehammer. It was a compliment. Well, you have a tongue like a sledgehammer, but it's not a compliment. And he's still right. So after you left Temple, what was the next step for you? Going to Wichita, is that correct? Or
yeah, I went to Wichita because I wanted to get experience playing in an orchestra. I wanted to have something for a resume if I wanted to take auditions. And they had an assistantship out there. Rosenfeld said, look, they have an assistantship out in Kansas I got a call from this guy. His name was Walt Myers, who was the principal trumpet in the Wichita Symphony, and he was teaching there. He said they're looking for a graduate assistant. You have to do some teaching. You get a stipend, and you can play in the orchestra. He said, which is a good orchestra. You get to play second. And so, yeah, I jumped at the chance. I sent a tape and went out and did a little audition. And it was good. It was weird being in the center of the country for me. And I only did a year. I never got my degree.
Yeah.
They wanted me to spend a lot of time in a library, which is what, grad students do. And I didn't want to spend any time in a library. I would just I'd just be practicing. That was my thing. I just wanted to play. So, but the teaching was fun and the orchestra was very good. And I did have that for my resume and I was able to take auditions. And, but I left and came back to New York to freelance and just pound the pavements. That's really what I wanted to do. I figured I could get a degree at some point, but felt like I was losing connections.
Right. And so is that when you were playing in New Haven and got in the New York Trumpet
Yep.
Ensemble also?
I won principal in New Haven, which was great. I was all ready to work in a frame shop making picture frames in Brooklyn. I moved into to a walk up with a friend of mine from high school, and I met Eddie Carroll and Dave Bilger and that whole gang, and I joined the New York Trumpet Ensemble. Was doing some freelancing there. I got that principal job in the New Haven Symphony. I was able to piece together a living playing freelance work, living in Brooklyn, and that's it's when I met Mark and the whole New York crowd. I was very happy to be working and playing, making a living as a trumpet player, as meager as it was. Now that I look back,
You guys did a lot of stuff in that era, though. Can you kind of talk about some things you guys did? Because there's like the Handel recording and
yeah, that was my first recording I did with the New York Trumpet Ensemble. It was Dave Bilger, Ed Carroll, Scott Thornburg, I think was on that. Myself and Ken Finn, was a trombone player who was playing bass trumpet, and the organist was Andrew Newman, I think.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but the Heroic Mr. Handel was the name of the CD. And then I made a CD with Ed, and I was touring with the group, which was loads of fun. I mean, it was just some of the craziest times. It was they had about 5 or 6 of us in the group. I think 5 of us in the group, and Mark Gould and I would switch off because I'd be working in New Haven and Mark would play. And then when Mark couldn't make it, I'd kind of jump in and play. And yeah, we toured the country, it's Canada, and doing all these gigs and making recordings and working in town. And since I was with that group, then I was able to work with 92nd Street Y. I think I did a gig with them, and there are a couple of orchestras in town I was working with, and working up in Connecticut as well, which had a lot of work, a lot of things to do in Connecticut. I was playing a little with the Eastern Brass Quintet at that time with Richard Green, and Gary Sinkowitz was playing tuba in there. And making some recordings with that group as well. So it was an eclectic lineup of stuff, but it was fun.
Now, there are little bits of you playing jazz, or I've seen you play jazz when you were with Empire. Was that something you had studied when you were growing up too? Was that like your father,
Yeah.
sort of your makeup kind of?
Yeah, my dad had the Aebersols, so before I decided really what I wanted to do, once I wanted to be an orchestral trumpet player, jazz went out the window. There was just no way. And jazz was in my family. My uncle played with Stan Kenton. My dad was into jazz and played big band jazz all his life. And I remember my great grandmother pulling my father aside and saying he likes classical music. That's it. Yeah, he's into. Can we change that? Is there a way we can get him away from that? Because she was a huge Kenton fan and loved my uncle and everything that he did. But I was kind of the outcast, being this strictly classical musician with all these jazz and freelancers in my family. But before that, I would, listen to my dad improv, and I would improv with the Abersols or play over things and do. It was interesting to me, and I'd go out on gigs with him.
Yeah.
So I love jazz. I mean, it was always there, and it's still there. I listen to it a lot now. When I joined Empire, that was kind of this. Rolf wasn't super at playing jazz. He didn't improv much. He could do it, but I kind of became the jazz chair, and I wasn't that great at it, but I embraced it.
Well, I wonder how that. I was going to ask next. I mean, how the jazz part of thing played into what you were doing with Empire. How did your start with Empire happen?
How did I join Empire?
Yeah.
I was playing a gig in Harkness Park. They had a big festival, which is it was a little festival they had up in I can't remember where it was, in Connecticut. It was right on the coastline. It was a beautiful site, and they had this big shell or a tent, and we would play classical music. And the Empire Brass came up to play with this Harkness Park brass, and it was usually an orchestra, but this time they just had a brass, and it was a concerto grosso style of these pieces they was doing by Handel, water music and fireworks. And so I'm sitting there, and Rolf, the group was looking for a second trumpet player, another trumpet player, because Tim was leaving.
Mm-hmm.
Tim was going back to the BSO. And somebody said, well, why don't you talk to this guy, Jeff? And so he asked me at that festival, he said, would you be interested in playing? I was like, hamana.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. So he invited me to the Berkshires. They were up in Tanglewood at the time doing their thing. And he said, why don't you come up? We have a beautiful place. You can stay up there, and we'll give you, you can play with the group. We'll have an audition. So I was like, sure, that sounds fantastic. Honestly, I didn't know a lot about the Empire Brass before then. I had a recording, their Ewald recording, which was the gold standard. But I didn't know, and I knew of Rolf, actually, but I was into getting an orchestra job. So a quintet wasn't on my radar. But I thought I'd go up there and audition, and if nothing else, I'd have a good Rolf Smedvig story, which would be a feather in my cap in some ways. So I went up there to the Berkshires. I couldn't find his house. I had no idea where I was. I was driving around Stockbridge. I tried calling him, couldn't get in touch with him. I left. There was my Smedvig story. Oh. So I'm sitting there. He calls me that night. Where are you? I said, I went up there. I called you. I left messages on your machine. I couldn't, you weren't there. It's fine. It's cool. And, thank you very much. He said, can you make it to Boston tomorrow? We'll be at BU. Okay. So I drove all the way to Boston the next day and met with Rolf and the group and played at BU for them, played through some excerpts, and then actually played with Rolf, and the group was sitting out there, looking at my teeth and everything like a racehorse. And that's when he said, yeah, we'd like you to come play with the group. It'd be fun. And then I went back, packed up my stuff, went up to Tanglewood, and started working.
Wow. And at that time, the group would have been Rolf, Sam, who was playing horn and trombone in the group at that time?
Scott and Marty.
Okay. Yeah. So that led to a lot of different stuff, I guess you would say, over the years. I mean, can you kind of, there's so many questions that people would probably like me to ask that I shouldn't about those years, but.
Well, I tell people, what I tell people is the best of times and worst of times. I mean, I wouldn't trade a second of it for as long as I did. I did it for 8 years. It was stressful. It was some crazy, stressful times. And anytime you're with a group, anybody who's in a group that's traveling and playing together all the time, even string quartets, there's an element of just being together all the time and working with the same people all the time that is very tricky to work around. And being, as Tony will attest, but being in this, in this family, this new family, you're, you have to do a balancing act between playing, performing, and working. And it was the way it was set up, as maddening as it was, I think it worked very well in that it was dictatorship for the most part.
Right.
Rolf would kind of say what he wanted and everybody would kind of do that. And of course, everybody's adding their input, and Rolf, Sam was brilliant. And really, they were like, I say they were the Lennon and McCartney of the group. And Rolf had these crazy ideas and was just this ball of energy. And Sam would be able to focus that for recordings and focus that for performances and focus that for arrangements. But it was brutal. I mean, my first experience with that was my first week with the group. We were doing the Scarlatti arrangement, and there were it was a brilliant arrangement, but there were trills there. I'm learning a ton of music. I'm getting all this music because I've got to get ready to go out on the road. And there was one section that Tim played brilliantly, where the second trumpet kind of takes over for the first and goes bum ba-dum, 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 and there were little trills in there.
Yeah.
And I played it with the group. I was practicing it 6 hours a day to learn this stuff. And I walked in there for the rehearsal and played through it. I thought I did a pretty good job, but I left the trills out. And Rolf said, he stops and he said, "Where are the trills?" I said, "Well, I haven't figured that out yet. I mean, I'm kind of swamped here." He said, "Have the trills by tomorrow or you're fired." He put his horn down, lit a cigarette, and walked out of the barn. I was so taken aback and then so angry about that. I went straight back to where I was staying and worked on the trills. Now, you're either the type of guy who is going to say, "Well, forget it. I'm not going to deal with this," and leave, which was probably a good idea if you weren't going to deal with it. But I was the type of person that said, "Yeah, I'm going to come back and show you that I can do this." Yeah. And that was a litmus test. And next time I walked in there, I had the trills. He didn't say congratulations or anything. He just looked over and shook his head and lit a cigarette and walked out of the barn. But that was what I understood the gig to be, that you had to hit the ground running, and that's the way it was from then on. You had to show up playing better than everybody else.
Well, I mean, that was a real golden era for that group when you were in it, because I mean, the class brass recording, the West Side Story, Gordon and Best stuff.
I was very lucky. I jumped on at that time when Tellart took over, because those guys were in a Winnebago slogging through the mud for years after they won Naumburg. Charlie Lewis was in the group, and they really were forging this group from nothing. And then when I joined, we were signed on with EMI for the fireworks recording, and Tellart signed us. Canadians were taking off, and Columbia artists wanted us to take off as well. So I was very lucky to jump on board at that time, because we kind of were on a roll, and we were just going up from then on.
Yeah. Well, you guys had your own unique style too, because I always remember it was like Tales. It was like the presentation was really sharp. Can you kind of talk about where Rolf was with that and how that affected the group and the personality of it?
I would say Rolf set up the blow. When I first joined the band, I was not playing really like the group. And when we did our first concert in the Berkshires, Doug Sheldon, who was with Columbia Artists, came up and watched the concert, and he came to Rolf and he said, "Yeah, he's a good player, but he doesn't sound like the group." And so I changed a lot. I was playing more angled down. I was doing what I would learn as a player. And so now all of a sudden my bell had to be straight up like Rolf's. I had to stand like Rolf. I had to hold my horn like Rolf. And once again, you're either the type of player who's going to say, "Nope, that's not for me. I got my own thing going." But for me, I kind of dug the whole thing. I liked the sound of the group. I liked what the group was all about. And I really felt like this is something I could do that I never thought I'd be able to do. And it's, I want to do this. I want to go out on the road and I want to make CDs with this group. And I liked the way Rolf was playing. I kind of dug it. So, but it was very different. So I listened to the way Rolf would warm up, and I started warming up like that.
What
I
was that
just
like?
adopted his warm up. He was really about, there's going to be some Rolf enthusiasts out there who are going to correct me on this, but I really believed it was about attack. He would always tell me about my attacks. He'd call them square attacks, but he had a way of attacking a note that was very broad, and he hit it, and it was very even from top to bottom. The sound was the same from the bottom register to the top.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the same width, the same weight, the same attack on everything. And that was, I kind of dug that about his playing. I liked the way that sounded, and it was something I'd never done before. And so I'd listen to him warm up, which is a lot of scales and arpeggios, not a lot of lip slurs, but just uh, attacking notes and making sure the intervals were in tune from top to bottom and keeping that sound the same. I do it today. I do the warm up today. I just do a lot of it. Starts out with arpeggios and scales, but in a way that keeps the sound the same from top to bottom. And then he would float on top of that and be able to do all this tonguing stuff, which today I can't understand how he did.
Yeah.
But I wanted to achieve that. So, but in doing that, I ended up sounding like Rolf.
Mm.
And the blow of the band was set up by Rolf, and his explanation was, we are the brass section of a symphony orchestra. That's the way this is. It's not five guys gathered around playing in their own little worlds. We are the brass section of a symphony orchestra. So that's why we were bell front.
Yeah.
The Canadians were doing bell front probably before us, or before the Empire Brass, but the by the time I got there, it was all bell front, and it was that kind of sound, like the BSO, that kind of feel. And once I got into that, then there was, I hooked in immediately, and it was able to mirror Rolf and anybody else in the band for that matter, because everybody was playing the same way.
Yeah. I mean, before that era, when they were doing Ewald and those other recordings, it was more of a
Yeah,
traditional kind of
they were
U-shaped.
set up in an arc, and then they were playing that way. Charlie was in the band, and actually Charlie and Sam started the group. Many people don't know that, and then Rolf was hired later. And then when Rolf came on board, and Charlie was busy doing freelancing and things like that, he said, "This is enough for me." He moved on. Rolf took over, and then Rolf had ideas about the way he wanted to set things up, and that's how it all started. And when Tim joined, Tim played a lot like Rolf.
Yeah, because they both stayed with Katala, so it was
Right.
so a lot of similarities with even the vibrato with those guys is really
Right.
similar, right? So the one story I did want to ask you about, though, and I know because I've heard you tell this story, because we're going to talk about Pilafian in a little bit, but the put on a happy face story. If you would
Oh
take
yeah.
over that.
Well, when I'm as the other trumpet player in the Empire Brass was the other trumpet player, and that's what they called me. He's the other trumpet player, and I didn't mind playing the role because Rolf earned his fame, he earned his popularity, he earned his right to be the leader of the group. He forged the group, and I didn't necessarily want to compete with that. And part of the jazz thing was my being different than that. I didn't want to try to be Rolf. I wanted to try to be a little different than Rolf. So I assumed, for lack of a better term, the George Harrison role in the group, where I was just a quiet guy who would sit back there and let Rolf do his thing. And he was happy with that. It was a good relationship that way. And then I didn't try to compete with that. But I didn't, the awkward thing was Tellark would come to Rolf and say, look, everybody has a solo on these CDs, but Jeff, what are we going to do about that? And Rolf would say, Jeff's not ready. Jeff's not ready for a solo yet. He's not, which, I didn't appreciate, but he didn't see it as me coming out and playing and having a competing solo on, so we'd always try to think of other things for me to do. And it was always, no, not yet, not yet. Well, so this particular disc we were doing called Empire Brass of Broadway was all Broadway tunes. And Elaine Montone at Tellark finally said to Sam, because she got tired of trying to talk Rolf into it. She said, look, we got to get Jeff a solo on this. This is ridiculous. This is just not, it's weird having this CD come out. Scott's got a solo. Eric has a solo. Where's Jeff's solo? Sam said, I'll take care of it. So he came up to me and said, look, let's do a solo on this thing. What do you want to do? So we talked about it a little bit. And since I was the most miserable guy in the band, we thought Put on a Happy Face would be appropriate. So I thought, this is kind of fun. Why don't I sing it? Because I was doing the karaoke circuit at that time. And so, and I could sing sort of. So I said, why don't I sing it? There's no words on this CD. Why don't we have an actual Broadway tune on there? Sam said, great. You play a little bit, we'll sing on it. It'll be you and me. And we'll add some percussion. I said, is Rolf going to be okay with this? He said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of that. So we get done with the last session and Rolf splits. Okay, everybody, it's in the can. Everybody goes home. Sam says, okay, let's put this together. So Sam and I waited around with Elaine and the percussionist, the set player, who was making like he was packing up, but he really wasn't. And we did this Put on a Happy Face, which was just a spur of the moment thing that just happened. And we did it in a couple takes, and I left. Elaine thought it was hilarious. It was great. She said, this is fantastic. I just figured I'd never see anything of it. I couldn't imagine it was going to go on the CD, and it was just fun to do. And I forgot about it. A couple months later, the CD comes out, and there it is. And everyone's seeing it for the first time. I guess Sam knew it was going to happen. But Sam said, he called me and said, Rolf just called me. He's furious. He said, he's screaming at me on the phone. He can't believe this thing is, he wants to get this canceled. He wants it redone. He wants to do the whole thing over. And I said, don't worry about it. So if you hear from Rolf, don't answer the phone. I'll talk him down. And so he did. And Rolf later embraced it. He thought it was good. And he actually asked me to do an arrangement of it for strings. And I did it in front of the National Symphony Orchestra. I can't believe it. I actually sang it. I'll never forget that.
You sang Put on a Happy Face in front of the NSO?
Yeah. And we did an arrangement of it. And he asked me to do a string arrangement of it. I did. And we played it. And I just was like, okay. And I embraced it, but I was like, I don't want to do that again. But I hardly ever did it live, maybe one or two times I would do it. But that was, that's that story. But Sam came through for me. That was Sam.
Yeah.
He was, he knew it was the right thing to do, and he could work Rolf that way. And so I miss him. I miss him very much.
Yeah. What talk about him a little bit. What kind of things, for people that didn't get to know him, what would you want them to know about Sam, or maybe what you learned from him?
Sam was a consummate student. I never saw him not trying to do something new, trying to learn something, whether it was music theory, whether it was jazz improv. When I joined the band, he was just getting into the improv thing. He could do it, but he got really great at it. And that's when he did the Traveling Light CD with Telarc, which is phenomenal. It's so great. And he was actually going out on the road and actually playing with jazz artists. But he was all about structure. He was all about discipline. He was all about routine. He would walk around the airport he had a fishing vest that he carried. And he had mouthpieces in his fishing vest. You couldn't get through customs with that now, but he would walk around the airport buzzing the mouthpiece. He'd just walk around the airport. He would have a way to stay in shape while his horn was in the cargo bin, and he did arranging. He would be the first guy in the booth during our recording sessions, figuring out how to make it sound great, learning about the recording process, learning what mics work, how they work, directional ones and omnidirectional ones. And he was just a fascinating person. He could talk to anyone. I remember Sam and I would climb into a cab in the middle of nowhere, and he would have a conversation he'd sit in front and he'd talk to the cab driver the entire way to the hotel or to the airport. Hey, where are you from? Oh, I've been there. Hey, have you ever been to this club or that club? Or, yeah, I know that guy. And he would be able to talk to anyone. Doing radio interviews with him was amazing because he would always talk about something I had no idea he had any knowledge about. He just talk about physics or talk about uh, classical music and string quartets, and all these things would come out of his mouth like I had no idea he knew those things. And he was just that kind of guy. He was quiet, but at the same time, his brilliance, you could just feel he would play something and you'd know exactly what he wanted from you. And we would play something together, sometimes the group, and he'd look at me and he'd say, "Do you get this?" And I would be freaking out if I didn't. But my thing was to get it immediately. I said, "Let's do it again." And if I could get on the same wavelength as Sam, I was so happy. It was like, wow, I did that. I was on the same wavelength as he'd say, "Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm looking for." And so it was that kind of thing. It was fun working with Sam. It really was. I miss him, and I lived with him for years. You know, we were really in the trenches together, and I'm very lucky to have that experience.
And you guys stayed in touch after you left the group, I'm sure. And
a little bit, yeah. Everybody kind of split. He left first, then Scott left, and Eric left. I was the last holdout, and I split and went to Dallas. And every once in a while, we'd see each other. I'd pass by in a master class, or I'd call them and say hey. But everybody had their own things going on. Once I kind of joined the symphony orchestra thing, I was kind of involved in figuring out how to do that again. And I lost touch with the whole brass quintet thing. But if he came through town, we'd always touch base and say hey.
Yeah. Well, that was my next question after you left Empire was you wanted principal trumpet in Dallas Symphony after your colleague Dave Bilger left.
Yeah.
What would talk about that adjustment going from playing chamber music? Although I always felt that Empire sounded, like you said, very orchestral the way you guys played. But it's still a transition, right? To do that and then sit in the back of the band and
yes. And it freaked me out a little bit. I spent that whole summer just working really hard at trying to play orchestrally. I switched equipment. I was on bigger mouthpieces and bigger backboards, and I tried to I played through I remember sitting and playing through all the repertoire, sitting in this house in Hartford that I was renting and playing through all this repertoire that we were going to do in the season and trying to figure out how to do this thing. And I got down there, and no matter how hard I tried, it always sounded like Rolf. I just sit there and I'd have this thing and everybody else was playing. And I mean, I really had to just not turn to the section and say, "Hey, come on, let's get on board here." Because can't you do what I'm doing? I just had to, I had the smarts to be able to say, all right, I got to figure out how they're doing Bruckner and try to do that. Because you have to kind of blend in with the section. And when you get, I mean, I was principal, but at the same time, they had a tradition there that took me a couple months to figure out. I remember my first concert was Symphony Fantastique. And I've been used to playing 2.5 hours straight on stage. And I would, at Symphony Fantastique, you have like 20 minutes, you sit out in the middle. Yeah. And the first concert.
Are you thinking about the English horn movement, which if he just the best if that was cut, right?
I'm right. Yeah.
There are no oboe players watching this. It's fine.
You're right. But I'm sitting there and my lips are immediately swelling up. So I've got my head down and I've got my mouthpiece pressing against my chops to keep the swelling down, because the first 8 bars I was going to play of the march to the scaffold was going to be, nothing was going to come out. So it was that kind of thing where I had to learn how to sit and be able to play after sitting. So a friend of mine, Doug Wright, said, playing with a quintet is sprinting. Playing with an orchestra is running a marathon. You got to figure out how to do the long haul and sit there and be able to pace yourself, but knowing how to to have movements off and be able to come back and play. So I had to change a lot in the way I practiced. I had to change a lot in the way I approached the instrument, because I had to be able to put down the horn for 20 minutes on stage and then be able to pick it up again and play. And that I don't know if anybody else can relate to that out there is listening, but it's a physical thing where, you know, when your chops are in that kind of shape, trying to be in orchestral shape is very different.
Yeah, because the volume is going to be different too, the breadth of sound, all those things.
Right.
What
Yeah.
what did you change? You mentioned your equipment when you were with Empire. What mouthpiece were you generally playing with that group to make it through that kind of show?
Oh, I started on a 1C,
Hmm.
and then when I started wanting to sound like Rolf, I just, you know, he never talked about his mouthpieces, never talked about equipment, never. And you never asked him about it because he just didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
So he'd light a cigarette and leave the barn, and then I'd go over and look at his mouth and see what he was playing. And he was playing 3Cs. I think he had a 3 rim for everything. Maybe the piccolo was a 5 rim.
Yeah.
But he was a Bach 3C guy. So I grabbed a 3C and figured out how to use that. And then I started sounding like Rolf, because it's really a different mouthpiece. But you can't play it through. I couldn't play a 3C in an orchestra, and I knew that. So I switched back to a 1C, which was a gigantic change, but it gave me that breadth of sound I needed to be able to play in the orchestra. And I, you know, boarded out the mouthpiece a little bit, and then slowly over about a year, I figured out what mouthpiece would work best.
Yeah. Are you still in the 1C now, or did you do something else?
No, I ditched the 1C. The 1C was always a little too big for me. I couldn't, the agility, I just lost agility on the 1C. I love the sound, but I couldn't get around it very well. So I had a custom mouthpiece that was made by Mark Curry for a while, which he's brilliant. He would say, well, what if I made that 1C 2% smaller? I said, can you do that? He said, yeah. And he'd sent me that, and I played on that for a while, which was great. That felt really good. Now I'm using a Warburton 3 MD, which is kind of like a dugout 1.5C, which helps with the low notes, gives me a little bit of endurance, more endurance, because I'm not getting any younger. And the sound seems to work in the orchestra. Sometimes I want that bigger sound that the one I can get on the 1C, but it's just not practical. I can't use it for everything.
Now the mouthpiece that you're playing though now, I mean, we'll go back to some of the orchestra stuff in a minute, but that's it's one of the more plastic
Yeah, it's
rims, right?
Lexan. I have a bizarre allergy to metals, and I thought it was nickel, and now I've been the last 10 years I've been trying to deal with what this allergy actually is. And I eat through everything. I'm a really weird case. And if there's anyone out there who has this dilemma, I'd love to hear from you. I have no cavities in my mouth, never have.
Do you mean just
And
eating through the horns, you mean?
eating through the horns, my hands used to eat through the horns. They don't anymore. But now my saliva seems to be like, you know, in the movie The Alien, when they cut open that little spider-like object and it eats through the hull of the ship. I can do that with my saliva. But I do, I eat away, and I have proof of this. I actually eat everything. I eat stainless steel, I eat through gold, I even eat through plastic. It even erodes the plastic. So I can stay on a plastic mouthpiece for about a month, maybe a month and a half. And it's like reeds. It's like I have to get another mouthpiece, even Lexan. I'm on Lexan right now with a stainless steel back bore made by the guy who makes a wedge mouthpiece. It's a 2-piece back bore, and that lights up the plastic, makes it sound a little dead, but I can get it sounding pretty much like brass. I do miss metal though. I miss it so much.
I used to eat through horns all the time, and then I stopped drinking orange juice.
No kidding.
Yeah, it was like, because now, and I loved it. I used to drink it a lot, and now if I drink it, my hands feel clammy, especially when I play. And
Wow.
and but I haven't eaten through a horn. The only horn I have now that is old is my piccolo, and it's just holes all over the place. But
Interesting.
yeah,
I used to eat through horns, and I've tried everything. I've tried diet. I've tried amino acids. I've tried, vitamins, changing my toothpaste, changing my mouthwash. It doesn't, it doesn't make any difference. It seems it is the weirdest. It's the weirdest thing. And so the Lexan seems to be holding
Yeah.
and working, but it's a little frustrating. And like I said, I really miss the metal, the feel of metal, having a one-piece mouthpiece. But this works really very well, and the people at Warburton have been unbelievably accommodating.
Yeah.
Terry and the crew and his wife Ann, they've just been fabulous. And thank God that I have a mouthpiece craftsman that's as good as he is and as accommodating, because otherwise I'd be in a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good that you get it figured out, though, that you'd have to like stop playing or anything like that, you know? So
Well, that's the one thing about playing that I tell my students, that uh, you have to be a problem solver, because these things come up constantly, no matter whatever it is. And you have to be able to solve problems. You have to be able to learn that talent, to identify it, figure out what's going on, figure out where you got off, and get back on, because it constantly happens. At least with me, it does anyway. And you have to be good at that in order to make a living at this, because problems crop up all the time.
yeah, yeah, on a daily basis sometimes.
Yeah,
It seems
right.
like. So, and to get ready for your Dallas audition, I mean, you were still on the road with Empire before you got that. Can you talk about the? I mean, I always had heard you were very diligent on the road practicing and staying on top of things, because you were still taking auditions while you're with the group,
Yeah.
right? Can you kind of talk about the discipline it took to do that, to get into the DSO?
Yeah. Once Sam left the band, um, I kind of knew everyone saw the handwriting on the wall in a way, because there was no clear direction. We were like a rudderless ship.
Right.
And uh, he was really the stability. And we always looked to him for that. And so people were dropping out. And when I decided to start playing excerpts again, we would have, when you go out on the road, it's hard to practice excerpts, because you're playing into a mute in a hotel room, and usually with the TV on. So the person in the next room can't hear you. Because if they can hear the TV for some reason, it's okay. But if they just hear a trumpet, that's not good. You're going to get a knock on the door. So, but I'm learning what valves to press and things through the excerpts. I do remember being on the road in Japan with the group, and I had to fly back and take an audition for the principal trumpet of Philly when Dave won it. Mm-hmm. And I was playing, I was really into this, and I had all the excerpts down, but you're going to think this is nuts. I would take we had these little hotel rooms in Japan. I would take a seat into the bathroom. I'd sit it in front of the toilet, put that Reunion Blues case on the toilet, almost zip it up so I could stick my horn into the bag. I'd take the insides of the bag out. I'd stand it on end.
Oh my God.
On the toilet. And then I would prop the music up somehow, somewhere. Sometimes I couldn't even see it. I would just be playing by memory. And I'd be playing into this Reunion Blues bag and playing through excerpts. And one time some guy came down and just banged the hell out of the door, because I didn't want to play into a mute before I had to take an audition. And I got on a plane and flew back to Philly, got in at 3 a.m., got to a hotel, and then got up to take an audition at 9 a.m. at the Academy of Music. And which was 9 at night for me, time-wise, because I was on Japan time, basically. So my chops were ready to go. And I played a very good audition. I thought I played a great audition, actually. I don't know how I played as well as I did. And I remember meeting Roger Blackburn after that, and he said, yeah, it was a good audition, but it doesn't sound like you've been playing with an orchestra. And I was like, yep, here we go. And so after that, it was all about sound. It was all about trying to figure out how to get that sound and figure out how to make that jump in an audition. So it didn't sound like I was a quintet player, but it was crazy. I was in great shape because I was playing both repertoire. You didn't really have to work a lot on the quintet repertoire, because once we learned to show, we just played the same show. Right. So I needed things to practice anyway. So So, you know, I was still playing things like, it sounded like I was with the EBQ when I would play excerpts. But when I got to Dallas, Dave called me and said that they hadn't found anybody. And they said, would you like to come out and play a year, play an audition and possibly take a year position? I said, yeah, I'm in. So I went out and played for the committee, and then they gave me a year, and then I won it after that year. I took the audition again.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't sure how I was going to like Dallas and how I was happy to have another job, but I wasn't sure I could do it if I was going to be happy there and make it all work. But it was fun. It was a good group of people. They were very welcoming, and I learned how to do the job and then had to re-audition. But then I won the job and everything was good.
And how long were you in Dallas?
6 years.
And then you went
Yeah.
to Philly as associate principal.
Yep.
And so what was the transition like between Dallas and Philly? I mean, the schedule's a little bit different. I mean, similar schedule, just different band, right?
Yeah, I always wanted to play with Philly. I mean, it was my dream job. And my wife is, I met in Dallas, and she's from Manhattan. And we both decided that Texas wasn't for us. I was auditioning we were both auditioning to see if we could get other jobs. And I auditioned for the Met and came very close to winning the principal trumpet job there. And I was scheduled to go audition for Philly, and I canned it. I just got back from the Met, and I called Dave and I said, I'm sorry, I'm not coming. I'm going to set up shop here. I just can't do this anymore. I was 40 and I'd had it with the audition scene. And I just thought, I just can't bring myself to do it. He said, okay, well, I'm sorry to hear that. He called me 2 weeks later and said, we haven't hired anybody here. Would you like to come out and audition? It was the same scenario. So I went out there and played, and there were like a group of 5 of us or 6 of us that day. And we played.
I see
Here's a
Tony's
face. Gee whiz, I missed that face. and I won the job.
For that job.
I won the job, and the rest is history. And I thought this is kind of cool. I wasn't real attached to the principal chair after that. I kind of had enough of that pressure. So I thought, well, I'll just go out there and, play associate. Dave and I had played together years and years ago. And it was when I landed here, it was like, oh yeah, I know how to do this. We were both like, yeah, we can do this. And it's been great. It's been a lot of fun.
What was that like telling your family you just won the job in Philly? That must have been an amazing thing, right?
Yeah, my mom and both my parents were pretty happy because they weren't into coming out to see me in Dallas. I mean, it was a long flight, and I just gotten married, so we decided to move back. And my wife was subbing with the orchestra because she was in the finals in Philly. She's a fiddle player.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was coming home after so many years, and I'm teaching at Temple. I went to Temple. One of the greatest things is I auditioned for Curtis twice, never got it.
Yeah.
And now I landed in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and Curtis calls, hey, you want to teach? So I was like, sure. So I was coaching quintets. I've been coaching quintets at Curtis and teaching there, which is a fabulous irony, which has been great, which has been so much fun. The kids there are so great, and I love keeping my hand in the quintet thing. So it's been good being, coming home again.
And you've had a little bit of quintet stuff you guys did in the orchestra when you recorded the Ewalds a couple of years ago. Is that?
Yeah, that was a nice surprise. And Ondine, our recording company, said, hey, we found out Ewald and Tchaikovsky are like from the same era, and this would be kind of cool. We got some leftover time on the CD. Would you guys like to do a couple quintets? I said no immediately. No, I didn't. But it was interesting coming there because now I'm in another quintet, and I just can't set up and play like the old EBQ days.
Right.
For me, it was, getting a completely different quintet sound, which was fabulous. And they were a lot of fun to do. They were tricky to record, actually, from a sound standpoint, because they did it they didn't do it in a studio or a closed space. They did it in a big hall. So it took us a while to get the exact sound right. But once we did, they're really great recordings of those two works. And it was fun working on those again and playing those again.
Now, and speaking of, you're bringing up the EBQ setup, did you kind of eventually work back to the natural way that you played as
Yeah.
time went on, right?
Yeah, I did. And it was just I thought about that because I just recently posted a video that I stumbled upon. Marty Hackelman sent me on Facebook of this documentary we did, and I'm looking at my playing, and I'm standing on I look just like Rolf, and I don't play that way anymore. You're sitting in the orchestra, and it's different, and you don't want to hold your bell up out of the stand, and you kind of want to blend with everybody else, but also I'm just playing differently. I'm sitting down all the time, and that changes. And so over time a lot of things change as a player. Your face changes, your body changes, you get older, and that's something that over the last 10 years I've been struggling with, watching my body and myself change.
And your hair changed.
That's a lot grayer.
Well, it was a lot bigger in the 80s. I mean,
we were the mullet brass. That's what they called them.
Did you say
there was a method to that madness in that the Canadians, and we were both at Columbia Artist Management, Canadian Brass and Empire Brass, and we were always kind of competing, although those guys they had their thing that they did, which is fabulous and funny, and Rolf was the opposite of that. Thank God, because we couldn't compete with that. He was no shtick, go out there and terrorize the audience with our talent, that kind of thing, drive it down their throats. And that's what we did. We tried to be as intimidating as possible. But then they wanted us to be like the opposite of the Canadians, who were kind of elderly statesmen, and we were the rebels without a cause. Yeah. And so we let the hair grow, and Tellark jumped on board with that and put us in leather and all this stuff. And it was fun. It was like a rock and roll band in a way. But yeah, the hair, I look at that and I'm like, oh, please. Oh my God.
Somebody asked if you still had it.
My wife won't let it go. My kids hate it. They look at those pictures. So I'm very lazy about cutting my hair. I'll just throw as much glue in it as possible and let it grow. And then all of a sudden I'll go to a barber and get my hair cut. Incidentally, I have the same barber as Frank Catarabic.
Really?
We actually met at a barber shop. Yeah, he's still in town, and he's great. I love talking to Frank.
Yeah, I was going to ask since you mentioned him, I mean, have you guys ever gotten together or just? He's got a lot of stories.
His daughter teaches violin, and one of my kids was studying with her, and so they had a recital at her house. Liz Catarabic is her name. Terrific violinist. And they had a recital at their house, and I show up to watch my kid play, and there's Frank, and he's sitting there watching all the students, and he said, "Oh, come over here, sit down." So I sat next to him, and we had the greatest time. We just talked about the old days. He's such a treasure trove of knowledge. He knew Harry James, he played with Reiner. And he has these great stories about these guys that he still remembers, and he's so much fun to talk to.
I need to get him on here and ask him.
Yeah, it's because how many guys do you know have played with Fritz Reiner, and his stories about Reiner are fascinating. They're really great, and the whole time he was there in that Chicago era.
Yeah, it's because I think I sent you the Chickowitz books that Mike and I did, and in the back. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Right.
And in the back of one of them, there's a thing because Frank and Vince Chickowitz they were roommates, right?
Right.
So,
right.
So Frank sends this. So Mike asked, that's Mike Chickowitz's godfather. So Mike asked him to, record something about his dad. So he sends this cassette tape, And so I have to like transcribe this thing.
Yeah.
But and Frank wants to say so much stuff, and he'll start saying something. I'll go, but I won't get into that. And it's like just constantly like stopping. And I'm like, I don't think he wants that on there either. You know, so it's a nice like 2 paragraphs. It's very sweet, but you know,
He doesn't do that when you're talking to him,
no,
at his
no,
house.
no. It was, you could tell it was going to be full on behind that. I should stop there
Right.
thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah. But it's fun. It's fun to hear that stuff. And it's really never about him. It's about the guys that he worked with, or his opinion of the guys. But at the same time, it's really fascinating being able to talk with somebody who knew so many people.
yeah, yeah. And he's such an enthusiast. I mean, he's still,
Right.
you know,
Still playing.
yeah. And there's that recording of Philly doing Lincoln Portrait with him and Dr. J. Have you seen this?
No.
It's on YouTube. There's a recording
Wow.
with I guess it's Moody conducting, and Frank's playing his Selmer C trumpet, and Dr. J is narrating like in a tales.
Never seen that. It's on
It's
YouTube?
it's on YouTube. I know I found it before.
Wow.
If I it will, I'll try to find it and send it to you again. But it's,
Interesting.
I was like, is that Dr. J? I think so. You know, I'm pretty sure
Wow.
it was Dr. J. I mean, you know, makes
That's
sense.
out there.
You know,
It's like
but
the Bowie and the Ormandy, Peter and the Wolf. That was the only one I knew that,
oh
with,
yeah,
with David Bowie.
yeah.
Since I heard Bowie never wanted to do that, it was,
Now the James Earl Jones Lincoln Portrait is, that's some Darth Vader stuff right there.
oh wow, yeah,
That's that was
I have to
Seattle.
check that out too.
That's incredible. Yeah, you can't really listen to that piece the same way after that.
Right.
I
I'll
think
bet that's great.
yeah, that one's great. The one I heard after that was Katharine Hepburn doing it. It was like, no, this doesn't, that James Earl Jones mix, that doesn't work. So what, you were talking about going to the associate role, and I mean, for people that haven't been much an orchestra player before, can you kind of talk about that duty and playing the concertos, and are there any pieces as an associate you see come up and you go, oh no, not that?
Yeah. Well, I originally decided to make that jump from principal. Like I said, I mean, I like playing principal, but I wanted to do other things. And the quintet thing was still kind of in me. And I dreamt of coming here and being able to either do a little soloing or put together a trumpet ensemble or something like that, and having time to do that. And the schedule here is insane. And Dave gives me plenty to do. And it's so I don't really have, I'm busier now than I was when I was with Dallas. And it was really a hit the ground running when I got here and learning how to do the associate chair, which is tricky. I like it in some ways because I get to sit and listen to these soloists that are scary good. Because normally when I was principal, I just go back to the lounge and have a cup of coffee and wait for the second half. But now I'm sitting here listening to some of these young players come out here and play Yuzha Wang, or the fabulous pianist with it, or playing with Argerich, doing the Ravel piano concerto, and these legendaries, Rado Lupu. He's listening to these soloists. It's like, oh my God, this is what it's all about. This is really incredible musicianship and playing, and looking at people sweating over the keyboard. Maniacs, whenever he comes in here, it's a pleasure listening to this guy play. He works so hard and he sounds so great. And but some of those little Prokofiev concertos, you want to kill yourself. Because how do you, I mean, you sit there forever and then just come in with a little tiny blip here and there, and then sit for 15 minutes and have to play a very soft high G at the end. It's a different kind of setup. You got to figure out how to do that. It was really scary, and now it's kind of become very challenging to me to be able to go out there and play some of these really difficult concertos. The last thing we did, Tony can attest to this, the last thing we did was Scheherazade 2. earlier in the season with the John Adams piece. Remember that? And you're like, oh man, this is hard. It was really some tricky, really hard playing. And I worked very hard on that piece. And some of these concertos are devilishly tricky, really tricky stuff. The Ravel Piano Concerto is something I still practice every day. Just about every day I play
Really?
through that lick. Yes, to keep it in shape, because you don't want to get out of shape on that. And if you can play that, like the latest one I got on YouTube because I got nothing to do, and I'm listening to Yuja Wang play through this, and it's like the end's almost 150 to the
Oh my God.
chord. It's like insane.
What do you do it on?
I do it on a C.
Okay.
I've never been able to do it on another trumpet, so that's consequently I have to play it a lot. But trying to work it up and get to that speed and play that, it's fascinating to me. It's very challenging. It can be really maddening though. But there are some concertos where you just kind of play underneath the soloist, and you can do these beautiful things. And like I said, it's a pleasure to hear these people playing out in front. It's really wonderful.
Wow. When you got in the orchestra, Eschenbach was the music director, and now, right?
It was Savalas for about 6 months.
Okay, Savalish,
Yeah,
and
and
then
then
Esch.
Eschenbach took
Yeah,
over. 6 months or a year. No, I guess it was 6 months.
and now you have Yannick. I mean, what's the? Have you noticed any changes in the orchestra through those music directors?
Oh yeah, yeah. With Savalas, who I greatly admired and was probably one of the best, the giants as music directors go, as
And he hired
conductors
you,
go.
so
Yeah, and he would. When I first got to the orchestra, it was kind of difficult because he wasn't moving a lot. You didn't get a lot of motion from him. He's old,
mhm.
and he would do these little things, these little hand gestures that I had to figure out. And then you knew, oh, okay. And he'd look at you. If you didn't get it, he would look at you. It's not. You see, and you want this guy knew Richard Strauss. So I'm playing, Ein Heldenleben with a guy who knew Richard Strauss. So I was, that was tense. But he would do things like he never did this. He would always do this, which was really cool because he would look back at the brass section and that was as loud as it was. When you hit the top, that was it. When he felt like you were going over, and he always worked the board. He could figure out how to balance the orchestra better than any conductor I've seen. And he would hold up his hand like this, and then you knew, okay, that was it. And you never went over that. So the orchestra played really very conservatively,
Mhm.
and he never liked things out of place.
Right.
And he would make sure that everything was set up like a beautiful painting that he had in his living room. And he had a concept of the piece. It was the same from beginning to end, and it was the same every time he did it, and you adhered to that. And I had a great respect for that. Eschenbach was very different in that he would just kind of let the orchestra go, and sometimes he took things incredibly slow, or sometimes too fast. Sometimes he wanted it really loud. His Beethoven was very different, and then so the orchestra grew into that and was playing different. And now with Yannick, we've reached another plateau, which I think the orchestra sounds incredible now. It's really possibly the best we've ever played is right now. This is like a golden era, and I'm so lucky to be here now, because this is really if there was a golden era for the Philly Orchestra with Ormandy or Muti, we're in another one right now where just the energy on stage that he doesn't contain the orchestra as much as Savalas did. This guy, he knows what I'm talking about. He lets it go, and sometimes he wants more than I'm able to give. Sometimes it's just like he wants this sound coming from the orchestra that that's a lot of work for
Yeah.
us. A brass section, we play a lot louder now than we ever have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he's a young conductor, and he has a sound in his head, and he wants to make sure we're reaching that.
Yeah. Well, and the brass section, yeah, I mean, you guys sound so great. I mean, talk about the dynamic in the trumpet section in particular. I mean, do you guys discuss things or? to you. I know. I see Tony coming up.
Well,
You know,
you should be here for this, T.
Tony, pop in.
Because now this guy shows up and everything goes to hell. And we, no, I'm kidding. Tony's been it's been great having this guy in the band, because I mean he comes in and he's now the youngest guy in the section, and he prides himself on that. You know, he's got more endurance than anybody in the section, and you know but how would you say? I mean, we kind of just show up and do it. We play, but it's an even playing field. It's not one guy that turns around and says, "Hey, we got to do this." I mean, T will turn to me and he'll say something like, "I'm sorry, am I incredibly sharp on this note, or are you perhaps a little flat?"
Isn't this this is where the cartoon came from, right?
Oh, yeah.
Tony, say something so your screen will pop up.
Okay, yeah. So if you can look at my, that was my first year in the orchestra. It kind of
makes sense.
Yeah, but
in that cartoon there, Jeff.
Yeah, but it is. We sit down and we play. Everybody who comes to the section, it's not like, okay, look, you got to sit on your thumbs before you get to say anything, because this guy shows up. He's an experienced player. He's got years under his belt, and every time a new player walks into the section, he brings something else that changes the section a little bit. And so he sits in there, and all of a sudden, oh, okay, let's make this work. Let's take some of this stuff, because I dig some of this stuff this guy is doing. Not everything, but but no, I mean, he comes in, it's like, hey, listen to that attack. That's kind of cool. I like the way he's doing that. And this guy pops out these low notes. It's like, oh, wait a minute. That sounds great. Let's, it's kind of like, this is a new thing. So a lot. What is that?
What is that? Say something, Tony, so it'll pop up.
It's a cup of coffee, right?
This is a picture of this. Well, I don't know if it's going to pop up. There we go. It's a picture of our Carnegie Hall tradition, which we haven't had in a little while, but to get coffee at what's that place called?
We get caffeinated. I forget, it's changed hands now. It's a little coffee.
It's a better, I think.
It's Dave's favorite coffee bar, and we go down there and get caffeinated, and then we go back up and get uptight. go on stage all whacked out. But it is great. It's great, and it's not like you walk in and you've got to blend. You walk in and you bring something to the game, and there's adjustment that happens. His ears are great. Everybody kind of adjusts, but it does change the section a little bit, and I always think it's for the better. It's just it's good to get out of that routine and make something different happen.
Yeah. Well, since you've been there, what recordings that you guys have made with Philly Orchestra do you feel are your favorites?
I haven't listened to any of them. So what have we done since you've been here? We did that. You know what we did? We did that Marcellus piece. Remember that?
Yeah.
Violin concerto. That was
great because Witten came in, sat in the section, and showed us how to play some of this stuff. And I just remember being shocked. I've heard Witten play many, many, many times. And he's so great at everything he does, but he got and sat in a section. He started doing this plunger stuff, and it was deafeningly loud.
I was taken aback.
It was so loud. I was just like, wow, like you hear a solo playing, and it's like, yeah, he's all over the horn and stuff. But when he honks, holy smolies!
Yeah,
it was like, okay, now I get it. That's a lot of energy in the horn,
Yeah, that was a fun session because we got to do some crazy stuff in there. It was just great having him there, and I was able to talk to him. And what else have we done since you've been here, recording wise?
A lot of live stuff.
Yeah,
some live stuff with Yannick that was like Mahler 8.
Right.
We just finished the Gershwin stuff. We did that Gershwin with Marion Alsop.
Oh, right. It's funny because we used to get CDs, and now they're just popped up online, and sometimes I don't even know when we're recording things. They'll put things out and for digital distribution, and you don't even realize it. But it's always stressful because we don't do many, if any, studio recordings anymore. It's all live.
Yeah. Right.
And so, it's tricky.
Yeah. But there is one recording I wanted to talk to you about, which was the National Brass Ensemble recording.
Oh, bye, Tony.
I'm sorry, Tony. We'll talk later. I'm sure something else.
I'm out.
I'm sorry, Tony.
Thanks. Good to see you. The National Brass thing was, I kind of fell into that. I was very lucky to fall into that because Phil was supposed to do it, and then Phil backed out. And Mike called me and said, "Well, why don't we add another person from Philly?" And so I got very lucky and got on board with these guys. And Mike thought it was a great idea because I'd done all the quintet stuff, and I lended my 2 cents where I could. But that was a crazy great session in that everyone just kind of landed, and I had no idea what to expect because you had Tom Rolfs and oh my God, I'm going to forget
Chris and
all
Mark
the players.
Inouye,
Mark Inouye, Chris, Dave, myself, Hooten, and the guy in
Adam Luffman.
Forgive me if I'm forgetting anybody. It was so long ago. And I'm thinking, well, what's going to happen when all these trumpet players land in the same place? And here we are in Skywalker Studio, and we're all standing there, and everybody's like, "Yeah, let's let it rip." And it was fun. It was like genuinely just a great time, and we were all so supportive and yucking it up and having a good time. And it was a short time we had to put this together, so everybody showed up ready to go and to make it happen. And it really happened. It blossomed. It was one of the greatest memories I'll have, in my career, of being able to sit down with all these players at this point in time, like the previous Gabrielli, and be able to put something together like this. And it turned out great, and it was incredible fun. And we ended up getting together again for a live performance.
The one in Chicago, right?
Yeah, and that was fun to promote the CD, and Mike's been trying to put it together since, and now of course everybody's shut down, so it's on the back burner for a while. But I'd love to do it again, just because it was such a great experience.
Yeah, I keep telling him he needs to make an LP. They need to turn that into an LP.
Right.
People would buy it, I'm sure.
Right, exactly. The vinyl freaks, right?
Well, you never could have thought that when you were a teenager starting to study with Rosenfeld, that not only would you be in the same orchestra, but then that recording would happen too, right?
Right. As a musician, you don't really get to choose where you want to be, and it's always been, I'll go where the audition is, and the audition happens. You go there, or I'll play with a brass quintet. I mean, I never thought about doing that. That was crazy. But now all of a sudden to be here, it's just, it's a dream come true in the same way. How did I get here? It's luck.
Yeah. Well, and you practiced a lot.
Well, you got to be ready when the job opens. That's for sure. Yeah.
Well, and what is your and we were talking a little bit some trumpet specific questions before we get into all of your other stuff. I promise I won't keep you here till like midnight. But what so you talked a little bit about your warm-up routine. What is that? What do you find yourself doing? Is it consistent day to day, or is it alter a little bit, or?
I've changed some. What I've ended up doing is throwing out stuff that doesn't work, because I've had to get more efficient with my warm-up. Whereas with the EBQ, I would play, and sometimes I would just be either experimenting with things, or I'd do more than I had to just to keep what I would call the dent in my lip. You just have to keep playing. I played a lot of piccolo in my warm-up, and I couldn't do the same kind of thing for the EBQ, because now all of a sudden I was having to sit on stage and not play. So I had to be more efficient and throw out things that didn't matter. So I started experimenting. I used to buzz the mouthpiece a lot, sometimes 10 minutes before I play, because I thought it was a good isometric and it was a good way to get my everything going. And it turned out that it really didn't do much, because I decided to stop it just to see. Sometimes I'll throw something out to see, well, what is it that it's doing? Is it doing anything, or is it eating time? And it doesn't really. And some people swear by it and some people do it, and kudos to them, it works for them. But for me, I decided to try it without doing that, those kind of things. What I'm doing now is I try to squeeze into about 20, 25 minutes. And so that takes me from point A to Z, and then I can get in the car, drive to the hall, do a little bit warm up, and be ready to play anything. I can't go longer than that because I have an hour and a half rehearsal to go through with the orchestra. And when you get on the stage of the Philadelphia Orchestra, you can't be tired. You have to be like ready to play, and it has to sound good. And it's, so in that 20, 25 minutes, I do a lot of what I do for a living. And that is, I try to keep intervals in tune. I make sure that I can target what I call target shoot. I do a lot of arpeggios, making sure, like with the EBQ days, to keep the sound even from top to bottom. So I have a big sound at the top as I do at the bottom, and making sure the intervals are in tune. Yeah. That is so incredibly important in what I do, because a lot of what we do is that most of the literature, if you're playing Beethoven, you're playing open fifths and fourths and having to make octave jumps. And if you're out of tune, sitting behind this wind section that is legendary, it really feels out of place.
Yeah.
It can be jarring to the people who are sitting in front of you if you're at least a bit out of tune. And so I try to keep that in tune. Scales also, keeping those in tune, making sure the sound is even. Tonguing, making sure that I'm keeping a double tongue in shape, because that comes and goes, happens. You can't, I don't have time to work that up. So that has to stay in shape. Just real basics. Yeah. Just keeping it that, and then working on the music that I have to for the gig.
Are you much of like a play with a drone kind of person, or?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that with excerpts. If you're doing, I use a Dr. Beat. I've worn it out. I got to get another one. But I'll do that with my students. I'll sit down and play pictures with a drone, put it on B flat, and then play it over and make sure to keep all, because that's a bizarre excerpt. You get so many bizarre intervals in there. Keeping that in tune is really important, because when you sit down with an orchestra, they all know how this goes, and you got to be able to put it right in the slot. Also, from a time standpoint, if you're working with rhythm, if I'm doing the Ravel Piano Concerto, I set it up first to play where it's on every, two beats a measure.
Right.
And then I'll do one beat every 2 measures. And then I'll do one beat every 4 measures. And so I can set the Dr. Beat up so it just clinks, and I've got to make sure that clink lines up at the next, that next downbeat.
Yeah.
Where 4 bars later, that kind of thing, because playing with a metronome all the time isn't great. You have to learn, but it can help you get great rhythm. Yeah. The first couple of times you're like, oh man, I gotta fix this. And the pictures, I'll do that also, do things like that. I'm doing more long tones now, especially since we're off, because I find that I don't want to lose that. And I have one etude I play constantly, Charlier number 2.
Just constantly play that.
I do. It's a weird obsession I have with this etude. It's I'm confessing that right now. And the only reason is it's in a horrible key. It's to play that in tune is miserably difficult, and it ends up it's hard to play through. It's like you have to be musical, but at the same time, getting from the beginning to the end of that is pretty taxing. I do it on C trumpet, and I try to just make it sing. So if you can do that, then you can kind of keep the offstage solo from Pines in shape, that kind of thing. If you can figure out how to play in that awful a key and keep it as musical. I just find that's a great tool for some reason. What I don't get to a lot is my valves, which what I try to do as a discipline is bang down my valves as much as possible, making sure that the rhythm is there and I'm getting the action happening with the fingers. That kind of keeps me in valve shape.
Yeah. Yeah. Are there other etude books you find yourself coming back to other than just the Charlie Etude?
I like the Charlie etudes. I think they're very difficult and very good. I steer away from the Arbin characteristic studies or any kind of cornet solos because I end up playing them. It doesn't help my orchestral playing.
Right.
And I'll try doing that. And all of a sudden I'll be playing the upper register a little different. I'll be more like a cornet player because you have to play those in a cornet style in order to make that work. So I'll find etudes that keep me in orchestral shape. And those, the Charlie A, I find those are great. The Conconi etudes are really good. Some of those, like the Phil Collins and the singing style and things like that, I'll play out of that. But I don't do a lot of etude playing simply because a lot of the etudes aren't good for orchestral playing, I find. And it's probably just me, but my sound ends up getting smaller and I end up just playing differently. And so when all of a sudden I'm not filling up a 2,000 seat hall if you're playing through a Clark solo or a characteristic study.
Like the one that's on Tony's stand?
Right. I don't know how he does that. I keep telling him, come on, man, get off those characteristic etudes.
I think mine was on my
right. But I'll pick those up and I love them. I pick those up and I come back to work and all of a sudden I feel like I'm playing with Goldman Band and I'm not actually able to put out as much sound. I'm not really getting that kind of big sound that I need for the gig.
Is there anything exercise wise you do to keep a broad sound? Any kind of like exercises I know that Bilger would talk about the Shoki power exercise. I remember seeing that.
Yeah. Wow. I never heard him talk about that.
Well, it was on the internet. I haven't talked to him about it, but it's like a lot of loud half notes in the intervals or something.
Dave's been holding out on me.
It was written when he was in Dallas. I remember reading this. So it's.
I like to play loud. If I'm sitting in a practice room, I'll imagine a 2,000 seat hall because if you're sitting in a practice room and you tend to just play to the walls of the practice room to make it sound good.
Yeah.
And then whenever that happens, and that's my biggest fear about going back to work. We're back in a Kimmel coming up next week. And going back to work and all of a sudden, oh my God, I forgot what it's like to fill up a 2,000 seat hall. So I'll play excerpts and etudes, but I'll play them orchestrally in that I'll move a lot of air and think about a 2,000 seat hall rather than, and that's, I think, the biggest barrier is for me. And I can play through excerpts like these days, I'll pick up Mahler 5 and I'll say, okay, I'm going to spend 2 days working up Mahler 5 just to keep in that kind of shape.
Yeah.
And I'll sit down. And if I've been playing nothing but etudes, that first page is like, oh, okay. I remember this. Now all of a sudden it comes back. I know how I have to play this, and it's a different world. So I keep in shape. Like I did Shostakovich 5 the other day, which was talk about power intervals. I mean, the end of that is just insane. Just to keep that blow, keep your chops in that kind of shape. And it's very difficult to do, but excerpts are like the perfect study for that. And you cover kind of two birds with one stone in that you're learning the excerpt and keeping in shape.
Speaking of the big associate principal excerpt, what do you play Heldenlave on? What's your do you play C or B flat on that? On the main part of it.
I play C and B flat.
Yeah.
I'll pick up the B flat for the low stuff. I don't play B flat much.
Yeah.
I hardly at all. I don't know why. I I don't like going back and forth between the C and the B flat. And these guys know that, and they make fun of me for it. I had to play. We played the Bugler's Holiday last Christmas, and I'm like, oh man, I was playing the third part. I'm gonna have to play this in a B flat because I mean, these guys are playing on a B flat, and for me to be up there on a C, it looks weird, first of all. And so I got the B flat out and I started playing. It's like, I either play, it's not that I don't like the horn. I either play B flat all the time or I play C almost all the time. But I'll pick up the B flat every once in a while just to keep it in shape. But I like the shape I can stay in on the C trumpet, the focus that it does for my chops. Yeah. And it's probably not a great thing, but I like, and it's a nasty horn to play in tune. The C trumpet is a bear to play in tune. And I lose that if I go to the B flat. I would always come back to the C, and it's like, oh man, these intervals are horrible. And so if I stay with the C, I go to the B flat. It's like, now here's a trumpet, you know.
Whenever Jeff has a B flat trumpet in his hand, we all pull out our cameras.
It's true. It's true.
It's a rare sighting. It's like, oh, it's a rare bird alert.
It is. And Gould used to get on me about it. He'd say, why don't you play more B flat trumpet, man? Listen to that sound. You got a skinny tone, and you can play more B flat. That would fix that. You know, he's probably right, but you know,
it's worked out so far, right?
I guess I'm on the back nine now, so I'm not going to change.
Well, I guess the big thing to ask you about is I just have on my sheet of questions: cartoons, NPR, blackjack, comedy, and now rapping.
So. Oh, yeah. That's really, yeah. Oh, that would, you know, I sat down and watched Hamilton. My kids, I wasn't really into it. And Disney streamed it. And I sat down with my kids and they said, you got to check this out, Dad. And I was so impressed. The thing is wrapped like all the way through. Yeah. And I started thinking, how did this guy do that? How hard is it to write rap? How difficult would that be to do? Because to write a song is one thing, but to write rap for that long and do that much. And I've never really been a rap fan, but this was really interesting. So the POA contacted me and said, we need a video to explain to people my age how to get the internet onto your TV, you know, how to do that. And so I thought, I'm going to write a rap and see if that works. And then that was hard. It was hard to sit down and get the rhyming and the rhythm and all that stuff together and figure out. And I tried to take it from Hamilton and make it sound like Hamilton a little bit, rip that off, and then animate the whole thing. And it was fun. It's a lot of work. It took me a long time to do, but yeah,
people it haven't seen cool. It. Tell them what it's pertaining to if they haven't seen this.
Yeah, the Philadelphia Orchestra is starting to stream things, and they didn't know how to explain to their audience. They wanted a way to have their audience be able to hook the internet to your TV, so you're not watching it on your phone. So you get a bigger experience, a bigger, you know, like a concert. And so they didn't know how to explain this to people, and they called me up and said, is there a way we can, you want to do something with this with an animation or something like that? Or I'd done a funny video before that to promote the opening concert or the gala concert that we were doing. So I said, yeah, okay, let me think about this. And I toyed with a couple different ideas. And then when I decided to do the rap thing, I had to explain, this is how you do it in rap, how you got to hook your TV to the iPhone through these different Roku. And so I kind of sat down over 2 weeks and wrote this rap. So it worked, and then pasted it together with in a video that has to go under two minutes, or has no longer than 2 minutes, because the attention span, right. People will just start scrolling, and it worked out pretty good. I mean, people really dug it. They thought it was, you know, it was done really well, but it was really hard work. It was a lot of work.
It gives new meaning to like Run DMC for you.
Right. Right. I don't know that I'll do it again, but it was fun. It was a catchy way to put this thing together, and I wanted to not make it look hokey. And
Yeah.
I think I achieved that. That was the thing. I didn't want to make it look, like I was trying to be Run DMC. I just wanted to be, a guy who's doing this. And Hamilton actually allowed me to get away with that because of the way that's all set up. But
Well, and then of course, I mean, I think the first time people really, or at least those of us that don't know you as well, became aware of your cartoon skills. Although I understand you were sketching for newspapers a long time ago, but was the blackjack mouthpiece ads and the
yeah,
commercials?
I actually have cartoons of the EBQ, which I'll show people someday. They're R-rated. But I would take, when I go out on the road, I take these Rapidograph pens with me and a sketchbook, and I do cartoons of Rolf and Sam and Eric and Marty and Scott and all the group members and put them in funny situations. It was something to do in the hotel room while I was, doing nothing. And at that time, I was doing political cartoons for the Berkshire Eagle, which was in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the newspaper in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, which was fun for me. I love political cartoons. And then I stopped for a while, and then I got involved with this. I decided to put out a funny video. I got into animation, and I thought I'm going to animate a video, and all these mouthpiece companies come up with these new mouthpieces. I'm going to create my own mouthpiece company and make it funny and make it a tongue-in-cheek approach to all these mouthpiece companies, a big mouthpiece and playing loud and all that stuff. And so I created, I thought that the blackjack mouthpiece, that sounds good. It's a tough guy mouthpiece. And I came up with a t-shirt and a logo and all this stuff. And then I put out this thing where, you play this mouthpiece, you can just level the entire orchestra. And Mark Curry called me up. He was making my mouthpieces at the time. And he said, hey, this mouthpiece, blackjack mouthpiece thing is taking off. Can I make this mouthpiece for you? I said, you're kidding. I said, yeah, no, it was a step blank. The one I was using was a step blank. And he said, I've been trying to make a step blank for years, and this would be a great excuse. And so he made it and called it the Blackjack Blank. And then I put his advertisement at the end of all the videos, and I was actually using it. It was a good mouthpiece. It was a great mouthpiece. I still have them. And then the allergy thing happened. But for years in Dallas, I was using a Blackjack Blank, and I thought it was great. And other people would call me up and say, hey, this is terrific.
Now, was that? Yeah. Oh, you were in Were you in Dallas when that?
I was in Dallas. Yeah.
So did the bassoon section like your ads?
No, they didn't think that was. I mean, they had a good sense of humor about it. They thought it was funny, but
they don't like us anyway.
But yeah, that was. But yeah, but I got a lot of great feedback over that video, and then I've done subsequent ones that kind of went off shooting into other areas, and it was a lot of fun for me to do. It was a lot of work.
Well, there's just so much truth. I mean, when the one with the German name for the new music piece, beating the hammer and all that stuff.
Trenchcoat Uber, and Chris Davini, that picture of myself as as a Trenchcoat Uber. Chris said, "Can I have a picture of that? And will you sign it as Trenchcoat Uber?" And it's hanging in the percussion lounge at work. Yeah, it's that was funny. That's we get these new pieces, and as Tony can tell you, they're insane. Some of these pieces come through, and they're absolutely impossible to play. So I thought this would be perfect way to poke fun at that and create a mouthpiece because usually you're always beat up. You come away from the job, and you immediately Advil and ice on your face. It's unbelievable. So yeah, that kind of came from that.
Well, and then how did the relationship with NPR develop?
I was doing cartoons. I was posting cartoons on my Facebook page, just because the video thing was a lot of work, and I wasn't getting a lot out of it. So I wanted to get back to cartooning because I got an iPad, and I wanted to try doing that on an iPad because it would be a lot simpler. And I figured out how to do it, and I started putting cartoons up on my page, and they would get shares. And one of the people who loved the cartoons was Mike Sachs's wife, Yolanda Condenasas. She thought they were hilarious, and she became like a fan. And she knew Tom Huizenga, who was the editor at NPR Classical Facebook page. They were buds. And she said, look, you got to have this guy post some of his cartoons on your page. You got to meet him anyway. And so we talked, he called me, and he wasn't sure how to approach this or what I was into. And he knew I wasn't a professional cartoonist, so he wasn't sure. I said, well, I'll just send you some stuff. And he said, what do you want to do, one a month? I said, let's do one a week. He said, oh, okay, well, let's try that and see what we got. And that gave me now I had to come up with a cartoon one a week, which now is an incredible headache, but it keeps me cartooning and it keeps me writing, because the writing is the part that's the most difficult, thinking of the ideas and making them work in a cartoon. It's a process, which is I'm still learning about every day. And then I'll send him cartoons and he'll say, yeah, this works, this doesn't, let's work on this a little bit. I like the idea, but let's change it to this and that. And over the years now, it's kind of, I can send them things and I figured out what's good for NPR. And it's been fun. It's been 5 years, I think, this Halloween. I think that was my first cartoon, was a Halloween cartoon or around this time. And so I try to keep about a month out in front with the cartoons, 3 weeks to a month out in front, and just come up with topics, and they happen on stage. This guy, Tony, will come up with cartoons. He'll say, hey, I got a great idea for a cartoon. and yeah, I get it. I've got cartoons from Bob. I've gotten cartoons from Dave. Some people, Eric Carlson gave me a really funny idea for a cartoon. And I kind of miss being there, because we just sit there and yuck it up on stage and somebody will say something funny. It's like, that's a funny cartoon. And even what really stops me in my tracks is when, that's one.
Which one's that, Tony?
Okay, this is a pretty funny one, but I don't know if you.
We should see
that one NPR didn't buy.
Tony, and that actually will pop up.
That actually happened.
I don't know if you can actually see this, but
all the bars of rest.
Yeah, and there's three guys there, and the second guy and the last, they're all sitting there. They all have the same expression. We're all counting measures, rest. And the second guy says to the first guy, pull my finger.
If we can see it one more time.
and that actually happened. that cartoon was one that I said fell out of the sky right under my lap. And I got a ton of shares, but so but those things, that I miss that, because now I have to sit here and scrape together ideas, on my own. But they're funny things that happen on the job. It's really sometimes it's a hilarious place to work. Things that happen, and the thing I get up on stage, and Yannick starts talking to the string section. And all of a sudden, he'll say, like in Jeff's most recent cartoon. God. Like that. Yeah. Did you like that one, Maestro? I thought that was very funny. But I always say, they're never about you. Never, ever are they about you. And there have been occasions where I'll do a cartoon about the Rite of Spring or something. And all of a sudden, my NPR will decide to run it when we're doing the Rite of Spring. I was like, no, let's postpone that. I'll get you another one. So there's no confusion that I'm not talking about this very Rite of Spring. So it is kind of tricky, because I am still working in the gig.
Yeah, those are great though, and anybody has played an orchestra, especially full time, knows that that's all true.
Yeah, it happens. This stuff happens. Yeah, it's like real life stuff.
Yeah. But anyway, I wanted to make sure we hit on all those topics, because you're in addition to being a great trumpet player and teaching as much as you do, you happen to be this incredible cartoonist.
Thank you. Yeah, I love doing it. It's a lot of fun. It's a big interest of mine for years, and I'm lucky to have this relationship with NPR, so I'm able to post something on a site that gets a lot of attention.
Have you ever thought about compiling them into one book at some point?
Yes, putting a book together is. I thought about doing it actually this year, but then other things came up. It's daunting. It's you have to file it all together, and I would probably publish it myself, because I don't know if even a publisher would carry it. And I'd have to do a lot of research on that. I probably have enough to put together a decent sized book at this point, but it's the work putting it together. And honestly, like today, I spent 2 hours doing a cartoon for the Nutcracker, and it's when I'm not practicing, I'm usually either coming up with ideas or sketching something down, or it does take a lot of discipline and time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But they're great, and they're so real. Apparently, my dog wants to talk to you now too. So that's for the noise you're hearing in the back. I guess the Benadryl's worn off, but.
Oh, poor Pooch.
Oh, buddy, you'll go out later. So anyway, but Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. And
it's my pleasure. This is fun.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun.
And after we sign off, hang on just a minute. I want to chat with you and Tony for a second, but
very good.
Yeah.
So just to make sure, I'm leaving, right? I'm kind of new to this, so I'm going to hit the button that says leave. Is that what I do?
No, you stay there.
I'm staying.
There.
Okay.
You stay. And thanks for everybody that watched this, and we'll see you next time.